Hello, I'm Sarah, this is Hardcover Hearts, and this should be my week of reading wrap-up where I talk about the books that I read, what I'm currently reading and potentially could read, but I'm still in catch-up mode from a little bit of time that I took off to finish a role and then take a little bit of a vacation and then start a new role. So I didn't want to not talk about these books and talk about them with a little bit of depth and a little bit of time spent. So thank you for still watching and being here for the books. So let's get into it. So this first book I want to talk about is something I wanted to read for March Mystery Madness. And I've seen it offered on Blackwells a few times and a few other places. And given the fact that I'm curious about this time period in this place, in the setting, which is in India in the late 1900s, so 1892, I thought I would give it a try. This is Murder in Old Bombay. It's the first of Captain Jim Agnihotri. Number 1 is going to be the new series, and it's by Neb March. My overall sense of this book is that it felt much longer than it was. It's, I think, 352 pages, but it felt like it was a much longer book, and not to its credit. I think the story is based on a true story, and I think sometimes that can really mess with a plot. Because you're trying to fit all of these things in that actually happened as opposed to just being creative. So we have the story of this captain, Captain Jim, and Captain Jim is, he's suffering from PTSD. He was wounded, and while he was recovering, he read a lot of Sherlock Holmes books and became obsessed with Sherlock Holmes. There was a case that received a ton of attention where 2 young girls, young women, I should say, were killed, and they both fell off a roof. It was being said that it was that they leapt to their death, but the facts that he saw did not fit that assertion. Therefore, he kind of inserts himself and offers himself up as someone who could help solve this crime, and becomes very close with the remaining family members. They're a Parsi family, and there's all sorts of elements at play in this story. There's his biracial identity. There is social status, him being a decorated war veteran. There's religious aspects of the story at play as well. Ultimately, from my sense, that the plot just went too many different directions. And yes, it was kind of pulled back together somewhat at the end, but it just felt like it was multiple books in one. And as I mentioned, I think it's because it was ground in a real life story as opposed to leveraging it for some opportunity to kind of explore the theme as opposed to hit these events that happened to its detriment, as I mentioned. So I don't think I'll be continuing on with this series, but if you have, or if you will, please let me know. Please let me know if you've read this, because I'd be curious to know your thoughts. But let me show you something that I read that just, my God, I adored this book. This book is Fresh Water for Flowers by Valérie Perrin, and this was translated from the French by Hildegarde Serle. This was a international #1 bestseller, and I get why. This is the story of Violet, and Violet is an older woman who later on in her life made the decision that she was wanted to move and become a caretaker of this cemetery. She, through a series of situations, ended up befriending the previous caretaker of this cemetery in this very small town. And as the job that she and her husband have, which are toll booth for the railway, they have to make sure that the railway signs are put down so that the train can come through. and it's a very small town that they live in. And in exchange, they get to live in this home right there, and it's a very easy life except for the constancy of time that they have to watch. Her husband is kind of a ne'er-do-well, philanderer. She does all of the work. She does everything. And they're told that because of some situations, their job is no longer going to be necessary. So they are looking for work. And she, at the right time, finds this role where they can move into this home and be caretakers at the cemetery. So my inner 1980s goth gal loved that premise, but it's so much more. There's an eclectic cast, so much talk about loss and grief, family and history and the richness of history, memory, life moving forward after horrific events. It's charming. It's so poignant, but without being sappy or sentimental. As you know, the French are really good at that. They're really good at honing really deep emotions, but more from a philosophical bent as opposed to kind of a Hallmark, sappy, putting the finger on the scale to kind of manipulate you into feeling something. I loved this book. I absolutely loved it. I thought it was so beautiful. Loved the characters and the way the story unfolds and how we learn about Violet and her past, and how she really ended up here versus what we were originally told was expertly done. I could not be happier. If you know stories like this, please let me know, because I would like to know more and read more of these. Or if you've read any of her other work, and if it's been translated, please let me know that as well. Next up, I had a digital ARC that I was given by the publisher. This is Kanazawa, and it is by David Joyner. I really liked this book. It had a quietness, it had but depth at the same time. It is the story of an American man told from his perspective who is married to a Japanese woman, and they live with the mother-in-law and father-in-law in a very small Japanese town. He's a teacher at the local university, and she is an artist. And they have all these plans for their future, and including buying a very, very old building and restoring it, and then in essence starting their family. And he thinks that they are agreed on this, on kind of this purpose, and agreed on this path forward. She all of a sudden starts to throw some wrenches in the planning that create some fissures in their communication and fissures in their marriage. I thought it was well told. It was very, straightforward. There's not a lot of backstory, very linear, very quiet, very small town Japanese life. Just a good, simple story. I very much like these characters, and I actually was rooting for them to work it out. So if you're interested in something like that, stay on the lookout for that. It's like I said, brand new release. Then I had the opportunity to get this from my local library, and I did it in audio. I've heard so much about this. I admit I was hesitant because of the size, the sheer amount of time it would take. So I decided to do it in audio and use this as my March of the Mammoths for March. So it's over 800 pages long. It's a huge volume. This book is The Love Songs of W.E.B. Dubois, and this is by Honorée Fanonne Jeffers. Okay, so I'm gonna say it. A lot of people have raved about this book. If you like epic family sagas, which I very much do, this book is remarkable. It's remarkable. So you have multiple storylines, but the main one is you've got a modern day modern-ish day family in New York. You've got Ailey and her family, Ailey Garfield and her family. We've got Belle, who's her mother, and Lydia, who's her sister. Coco's another sister. And we have also a family down in Georgia, very near where I used to live. So a lot of the references just felt so, brought back so many memories for me. And then we also have the historical kind of the songs of the past, of the legacy, very rooted in these Georgia roots of the slave families and what happened to them in this area. I loved this family. I loved their connections. I loved Ailey struggling to move away from and be independent of, but then finding her way and a place with them. I felt for the sister. I felt for the mother. I loved how the narrative wove itself through. I love the culmination at the end of the book. I loved the slow understanding of who these characters are as we follow them, and the kind of the blossoming of each of these characters. And it's everything that everyone says. It's absolutely phenomenal. I think this is going to be a book that people are going to be talking about for a very, very long time. It was excellent. Then the next book that I want to talk about is a fluke buddy read with me and Leo, kind of like spur of the moment. I saw Jesper of Cover Talks from Instagram. I'll put a link to his handle below. He showed that he was reading this and really enjoying it. I mentioned that I had volume 2 because this author, this is Encircling by Carl Frode Tiller, translated by Barbara J. Haveland. Look at that cover right there. This author had come to the Bay Area Book Festival, which is a book festival that in pre-COVID days happened every May. In fact, Alice Walker is going to be in conversation with Honorée Fanonne Jeffers, who just wrote that book I just talked about, The Love Songs of W.E.B. Dubois. But unfortunately, I'm going to have to miss it because I have plans. Unfortunately, I can't even believe it. But yes, so I saw this author and I made mention of it to Leo, how interesting that was. And he was like, oh, I wanted to read that. It sounded so great. So impromptu buddy read activated. We both jumped into it and the premise is amazing. The story is about a man that we don't meet. There's a man who has amnesia, and his psychiatrist has put an ad out in the local paper of this very small town in Norway, asking for people who know this man to send stories to see if they can help him piece together who he was. And so very much about identity, memory, people's relationships, and trying to piece together someone from only that information. So in this entire volume, we do not hear from or meet the main character, but we meet 3 people who knew him very well. We meet a male friend of his who was in love with him, and they had a little bit of a sexual relationship together. We meet his father, who was a pastor, and he had a tenuous relationship based on what John, his friend, said. But the stepfather really wanted to build a connection with him and seems to have cared about him. And we have Celia, who is kind of the third of the trio of kids that used to hang out together. John, David, the missing person who's lost their memory, and Celia. And her memories and her relationship with him, which was also sexual and unbeknownst to John. So there's a interesting mix of characters, and it's a combination of where they are today, and then getting this notice that something happened to their friend that they have lost contact with, or stepson, and then the letters that they write, trying to contextualize who they were in their lives. Fascinating. It's not plot driven, but deep character studies. The writing is so exquisite. It's very straightforward. It's very clear, but so much happens. There's so much psychological mining of these people, and each one feels so distinct. Looking forward to jumping into the second volume later today. So yeah, that's it. That's all that I've read. Let me know, are you interested in any of these? Have you read any of them? And if there's anything that's like that, please let me know, because I'd love to know, especially if I liked it. If I didn't like it, it's okay. You don't have to share that. But that's it for me for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll look forward to talking to you soon. Bye.